I'd like to start by saying, if you'd like to listen in French today, you'll find a live translate button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Unfortunately, this option isn't available if you're watching on live stream on YouTube. I'm joining you today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. GreenPAC acknowledges this land, but also the critical need to repair the injustices faced by Indigenous people, to uphold their rights, and to recognize their leadership in sustaining our planet. For those of you who don't know GreenPAC, we are a Canadian nonpartisan nonprofit organization working to build environmental leadership in politics. We believe that to make meaningful and sustained environmental progress, we need environmental leadership in every sector and within every political party. During elections, GreenPAC identifies proven environmental leaders across parties so Canadians can support their campaigns. Our internship program places young environmental champions in the offices of MP changemakers on Parliament Hill. And through our new Everyday Advocates initiative, we are supporting a growing network of Canadians who want to see our elected officials know that the environment is a priority, who want our elected officials to know that the environment is a priority, not just during elections, but every day. And now I'm thrilled to welcome our guests, about whom there's so much more to say than time permits me. Mr. John Podesta is the founder and chair of the board of the Center for American Progress and Center for Equitable Growth, both in Washington. He served as counselor to President Barack Obama, where he coordinated the administration's climate policy and initiatives. He was also White House Chief of Staff to President Clinton and a member of his cabinet. Welcome. Welcome also to the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson, Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and one of GreenPAC's endorsees. Originally from Saskatchewan, Minister Wilkinson has served as a member of Parliament for North Vancouver since 2015, and before this spent more than 20 years dedicated to the development of green technologies and as a leader in the private sector. Lastly, it's an honor to introduce our moderator today, the Honorable Rosa Galvez, who has been an independent member of Canada's Senate, representing Quebec, and has been since 2016. Originally from Peru, Senator Galvez holds a PhD in environmental engineering, is a professor at Laval University, and is one of Canada's leading pollution experts. She's also an active champion of a clean and just recovery from the pandemic. And lastly, I'd just like to say welcome to all of you who are listening from across the country. I understand we have more than 700 registrants for this event, including several members of our provincial and federal governments. One last note from me. We have time set aside a little later in the session for your questions. You'll be able to share those using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen because the chat is not enabled for this conversation. So thank you, and over to you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Welcome to everybody. We have an interesting conversation ahead, so I will start it. The global pandemic is seriously testing our resilience and solidarity. It is also a harsh but necessary realization of the interconnections of the ongoing crisis, be the COVID-19, the inequality, or the climate change crisis, but also the deep interdependence and of the human and ecosystem health. Today, it is my honor to moderate this conversation at such pivotal time in history. And I would like to invite my co-panelists to say a few introductory words, starting by John Podesta.
Well, thank you, Senator. And let me begin by thanking GreenPAC and thanking you, Sarah, for doing this. It's quite an honor to appear with Senator Galvez and Minister Wilkinson, and it's a good time to be talking because, of course, we're just 20 hours away from what has turned out to be not so peaceful a transition of power in the United States. We saw a real assault not only on our capital but on our democracy just a couple of weeks ago. And we're still kind of recovering from that. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit. But I think one of the things that it's worth noting is that there couldn't be a bigger sea change from a policy perspective and for from the perspective of what the senator just described between President Trump and now President Biden. President-elect Biden recognized the intersection of these crises, the COVID crisis, the resulting economic crisis, the fact that it exposed, along with the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, the racial justice crisis we have in the United States, and of course he linked that and linked recovery to sustainability and dealing with the climate crisis. So he comes with the wind at his back. He got more votes than anybody ever elected to the presidency, more than 80 million people. Climate and energy were a contested issue in this campaign. The vice president during the course of the campaign, President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris put forth very bold ideas about how to deal with, get the virus under control, get the economy restarted, but also how to attack this existential threat that we all face in the global community from climate change. So he is hard at work building a government and a cabinet and a White House staff full of climate champions. I know we'll get into that a bit, but he's also planning on aggressive executive action and a program of investments to begin to put the United States back as a global partner with countries like Canada that have leaned out, been aggressive players with the increased ambition that the Canadian government has shown to enhance its nationally determined commitment. I think that the United States is back in the climate game and will be a partner and a leader as we go forward. So I look forward to our conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Senator Galvez, and certainly thank you for all the work you have done with respect to advancing the climate file over the years, including in the Senate right now with your being the sponsor of the government's Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, which Bill C-12, which is currently in Parliament. And thank you, John, for joining this and for your decades of work on these important issues. And I'd also like to thank GreenPAC for organizing this event and certainly for your advocacy on the climate file. Aujourd'hui, je vais parler en anglais, mais bien sûr, s'il y a les questions, je vais écouter et répondre en français. I would also like to start by acknowledging that I am situated in North Vancouver, which is on the traditional and ancestral territories of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam First Nations. I know there's going to be a lot of opportunity for discussion and questions over the course of the next hour, so I'm going to be quite brief. Clearly, this has been a tough year for everybody in this country, in the United States, and in countries around the world. Focus certainly in Canada primarily has been on supporting Canadian families and Canadian businesses to get through the COVID-19 crisis. But of course, Canadians do expect that their government can walk and chew gum at the same time and look towards the future, both with respect to the looming crisis that is climate change, but also with respect to how do we actually build back out of this, this pandemic in a manner that will enable us to have a more resilient economy and society going forward. The run-up to President-elect Biden's inauguration, I think, has offered a welcome dose of climate optimism. He won a mandate from the American people, with climate action being very much a central pillar of his plan for economic growth. And he has been putting together a team of very thoughtful climate experts, very much including people like John Kerry and Gina McCarthy, who will deliver an all-of-government effort. I, and certainly the government of Canada, welcome President-elect Biden's promise to return the US to the Paris Agreement. And certainly we look forward to forging new opportunities for bilateral cooperation with his administration, opportunities that I firmly believe can accelerate effective climate action by both parties. As folks who are observing this today will know, the Trump administration moved away from multilateral and domestic climate action 4 years ago. During those 4 years, Canada has continued to move forward in aggressively taking action to fight climate change and to foster clean growth. This was not simple, given the integrated nature of the US and Canadian economies. However, our government remained committed to climate action domestically and to working to be a leader in climate discussions internationally. Certainly, some conservatives in our country have argued that Canada should do less, given the lack of American engagement. However, given the existential threat that is posed by climate change, this was not a path that we were prepared to go down. In 2016, we developed the first real plan that climate plan that Canada has ever had. It included a whole range of initiatives from phasing out coal to putting in place methane regulations, investing in renewable energy, building zero emission vehicle infrastructure. And we put a price on pollution because we believe that it should not be free to pollute anywhere in Canada. And last month, we built upon this initial plan when we released a further strengthened plan, which provides a detailed pathway through which Canada will not just meet, but will exceed its current Paris targets, as we know all countries around the world must do if we are to actually follow the science. Beyond action on climate, we have also taken bold steps domestically to stem decline in biodiversity, and we are seeing around the world, and through massively increasing protected spaces in this country and investments in protecting species at risk. With the inauguration of the new president, I believe there is significant alignment between his climate plans and our government's climate agenda, and a lot of scope for collaboration, from electricity grids to automotive sector to protecting nature and species at risk. By working together, we can more effectively reduce emissions in both countries, and we can drive economic growth associated with the transition to a low carbon future. I will just conclude by saying that there is no doubt that the incoming US administration will be looking for strong allies in the fight against climate change, and they will find none more determined than right here in Canada.
Excellent. What a great introductory words from both parts. So following what the introduction of John Podesta about tomorrow's event, the recent violent insurgents on the US Capitol and subsequent impeachment of President Trump for a second time are unprecedented in your country's history. As someone, John, that is close to the eye of the storm, what do you expect to see tomorrow? What are the potential implications on President-elect Biden's ambitious, as we all say, and agenda, particularly in climate plan?
Well, thank you, Senator. And I think tomorrow will, surprisingly, I'm going to say this, will be a moment of celebration. Obviously, the events of January 6th, I think, still ring in the city. I'm in Washington, D.C. The city is something of a lockdown. The inauguration is always a high security event, but made more so, I think, this year as a result of a insurrection that was really incited by the outgoing president. He will not be there tomorrow. I think for most people who want to see a new day in the United States, our attitude is good riddance. But the president will be sworn in, accompanied by former Republican as well as Democratic presidents. And he will, I think, as we've seen in the recent polling, enjoys at least the good wishes and the fact that he's carried himself out with real discipline through this period in a way that's met with support from a supermajority of the American people. And I just want to focus on what we'll expect tomorrow. A president who will give an inaugural address that will do his best to try to bring the country together, given the deep division in our society. That will come, I think, more through action than through words. He will need to demonstrate that he can make good on his commitment to get on top of COVID, to more effectively deal with the crisis. He'll do that through a range of executive actions. But so far, I think what we've seen is both the president-elect and vice president-elect and their teams react to the events of January 6th with a great deal of discipline. They have not lost sight of what their job is, which is deal with the crisis facing the United States. I would add to the 4 crises the president elect spoke about during the campaign, the democratic crisis that we're experiencing right now. But he needs to move forward, and you'll see that happen through a series of day one actions, including rejoining the Paris Agreement, focusing again on a ambitious program to get both the pandemic under control, get the vaccine distributed, and then move forward to really restart the economy. And I think they have done during this transition what they needed to do, which is to let the Congress render judgment about the actions of President Trump on January 6th through the unprecedented action of a second impeachment. The Senate will have to deal with that, but I think the Senate will be capable of rendering their own judgment about whether the fact that he incited, in essence, a riot in the Capitol is worthy of rendering that judgment. But in the meantime, I think the administration will not be distracted from that because of the massive job they need to do on these various crises. And you'll see a lot of action on climate right at the beginning. As I said, from rejoining Paris to reversing the actions of the real assault that President Trump made on environmental protection across a range of fronts during his 4 years in office, and then trying to coordinate to build both at the domestic level around Gina McCarthy, our former EPA administrator, who will return to the White House to coordinate the strategy on ambitious goals around decarbonization of the U.S. economy, along with, as the minister noted, a very stellar team at the global level, led by former Secretary of State John Kerry, to re-engage internationally. And I think that it will be a moment of stark contrast from one administration to another, maybe more contrast than we've ever seen.
Thank you.
At least in modern history. But one that I think, of course, I welcome as a Democrat, but I think the public welcomes, to get us back to a person who has demonstrated by his character the fact that he cares about the success of all Americans and will get to work starting immediately after he takes that oath of office in implementing policies that will put us back into a framework where we're good partners with our allies and partners around the world, where there's a new embrace of responsibility in the multilateral sector. And I think it'll be a welcome change, not only in the United States, but for people around the world.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to touch on the leadership of U.S. with the Biden administration. Minister Wilkinson, we know that white supremacy and political extremism exists here too in Canada, and that do you think we have learned some lessons from what we have seen, and you especially and in particularly being responsible of a heavy politicized issue like it is climate change?
Well, let me start by saying that I think Canadians from coast to coast to coast were appalled by what they saw happening in the U.S. Capitol a week ago. But I do think that while there was shock and revulsion to what was happening with respect to the democratic institutions of our closest friend and ally, we should be careful to think that we are immune here in Canada. We are not. And I think that one of the thoughts coming out of it that I have reflected a lot on is if you think about the support base that propelled Donald Trump into office and to a certain extent continues to propel him, at least part of it relates to the grievances of many people who felt in some measure that they were not being heard or that they were being left behind. We have similar challenges in this country, and I think that what we need to do is to make sure that we are thoughtful about trying to respond to the legitimate concerns and aspirations of people who are feeling that the current system is not hearing them. And certainly in the context of climate change, we have a nexus between energy and the environment, which is one that we need to bridge. And we have part of our country that is very much hydrocarbon dependent with respect to its economy, where people are feeling threatened and are concerned about the future for themselves and their families. We need to respond to that, and we need to be thoughtful about how we respond to that. It is incumbent, in my view, on the part of politicians across this country and across political stripes to strive to be inclusive and to strive to ensure that we are hearing and trying as much as we can to respond effectively to those concerns. I think that's how we avoid getting into the kinds of situations that we saw happening last week in the United States.
So Americans have now elected a president who has committed a net zero emission target by 2050 and $2 trillion in spending to tackle climate change tied to plans for economic recovery from the pandemic and addressing the racism that underlies both crises. Here in Canada, our government recently released a strength climate plan, also with a net zero target for 2050, as Mr. Wilkinson mentioned. And last year, the European Union came out with its climate and energy package, and China surprised the world with a net zero target by 2060. So, Minister Wilkinson, how optimistic are you as we head into this new year? Is 2021 likely to be the global tipping point where the scale of action will match the scale of the crisis at hand? What are your thoughts on that?
I am very optimistic, and I'm optimistic for a number of reasons. I think that the way in which we're thinking about climate change has fundamentally changed over the past decade. And that relates to at least two important things, in addition to having a president in office who will focus on climate. One is the change in the investment community, where global financial markets and international capital are looking at the climate issue as one of the fundamental bases on which they're making investment decisions. That is relatively new, and that is changing the way corporations behave. It is changing the way governments are able to behave. So I think that's fundamentally different, and I think it's very powerful. The second thing is, if you asked Canadians 10 years ago about the climate issue and fighting climate, you would have found that people thought there was a choice between the environmental issues and reducing greenhouse gas emissions that we needed to do versus the economy, that they felt like there was an economic penalty associated with doing that. If you look at public opinion polls in this country now, the vast majority of people believe that addressing climate change will be good for the economy and good for their economic prospects. That changes the nature of the conversation. And it's the product of the work of GreenPAC and a whole range of folks over the course of the past number of years. But it changes the nature of the conversation. We're talking now about a climate plan that is as much, the climate plan we released a month ago, as much an economic plan for the future of Canada, a prosperous future that provides opportunity for children and for families, in a world where we actually are doing what we need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and ultimately achieve net zero by 2050. So I think that's fundamentally different. And I feel like we've been pushing this boulder up this hill for many, many years, and we finally gotten to the top. And this is kind of the time where you actually start to see the boulder going down the other side of the hill with its own momentum. And I think that only is helped by the work that President-elect Biden and his team will be doing in the United States.
Thank you. Mr. Podesta, with the Democrats now having a confirmed majority in the Senate, does that finally open up venues for climate legislation in the US? How, and later, Mr. Wilkinson, could that legislation impact the targets in Canada? John.
Well, certainly I think it's a lot better to have 50-50 than 48-52. Being able to control the agenda, being able to access what is a kind of arcane procedure in our United States Congress called budget reconciliation, which really has to do with the investments and taxation policy of the country. But that's only requires a simple majority vote in the Senate. Opens up a lot of opportunity for the president. And I think to go back a little bit to what the candidate Biden promised in the campaign, and what really they're trying to, in the course of this transition, trying to manage towards is, as has been noted, net zero by 2050. 100% clean power sector by 2035, which is an audacious goal and one that's achievable, but will be difficult. And 40% of the investments going to distressed communities, frontline communities, communities that have been left behind, communities that have borne the brunt of pollution from the burning of fossil fuels and from industrial production. And see the highest rates of asthma, the highest rates of healthcare disparities across the country. I think those are really ambitious targets and goals, but they're backed up with a set of specific sectoral targets for investment and for creating the standards that are going to be needed through the authorities that the executive branch already has to move forward on power, on methane, as the minister talked about, reducing the impact of super polluting hydrofluorocarbons, which are used in cooling and air conditioning, and which just new authorities were just given to the executive branch by a bipartisan vote of Congress just in this last December. So it's a whole of government approach. It needs to be focused on getting those investments going, and I think that also answers something else that the minister spoke about, which is giving people the sense that there is opportunity for everyone in this clean energy, more sustainable economy. It is to, in fact, build a just transition towards cycles of innovation, business development, work that needs to be done in building out a more sustainable future for both the country and the world, and to keep our commitments around the world on finance and other things. But I think that it's an ambitious agenda, but there's no question that having the ability to at least have the advantage of Democratic control of the Senate, along with Democratic control of the House, give them a running start on getting that job done and meeting those commitments to justice, to equity, to building a sustainable economy. And I could say more about that, but I think ultimately there is a challenge, because when you have such a 50-50 with Vice President Harris breaking the tie, and you have a narrower control of the House, you have to be skilled enough to be able to put forward a program that can get the votes. It's sort of inherently a partisan process. They have to be able to get the votes of senators from coal-producing states like Joe Manchin, along with climate activists like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and you have to get them all going in the same direction. And I think the threat of climate change gives them the opportunity to find common ground as they did during the course of the campaign to pull at least the Democratic Party, hopefully get some Republican support for that kind of vision, and move forward together.
Thank you. A reaction to that, Minister Wilkinson? You're muted.
So, I mean, certainly, I agree with what John said, and I think a lot of the question related to the United States itself. You know, I do think that that there is an emerging consensus in this country as well, with respect to the urgency of the need for climate action. I have always said that by the time I'm finished in politics, that my objective is to hopefully get to the position where the United Kingdom and many of the European countries have gotten to, which is this is not a partisan issue anymore. We have thoughts about perhaps different pathways through which we will accomplish effective climate action, but that at the end of the day, all political parties that want to be credible in the context of electoral campaigns must bring to the table a credible plan for climate action. And that is something that we are striving to do through a range of things, including the act that you are the sponsor of in the bill. And I think that's something that we as Canadians should strive for. But the more Canadians that are convinced of the absolute urgency of the need for climate action, the more likely that is. So
that's it. This November, the world is set to meet in Glasgow at the COP26 summit to discuss how to accelerate action towards the goal of the Paris Agreement and the UN framework on climate change. On that issue, we should be looking to the new US for leadership. So do you have some comments on that, John?
Yeah, well, look, I think we're back in the game, and Secretary Kerry has both the passion, the credibility, and history to be a leader. He knows how to get ambition out of a multilateral system. Did it with Paris. Did it with the Kigali Agreement, the amendment to the Montreal Protocol to phase down these super polluting hydrofluorocarbons. So you couldn't have a stronger team on the field, I think. But in the end of the day, the United States lost a lot of credibility over the last 4 years. So the most important thing the United States can deliver is domestic action that I think can be taken forward to the international system. There are a lot of other elements that will lead up. 2021 is a busy calendar with the G7, the G20, a leader summit that President Biden will convene, presumably if it's in the first 100 days, virtually, probably to restart the Major Economies Forum. There's work in the Arctic Council, other fora that are really critical. There's the meeting of the Convention on Biodiversity that China hosts, that is scheduled for the spring, but is likely to shift to the fall. So there's opportunity to build global momentum. But I guess if it's okay, Senator, I'd like to say one word about net zero. Where did that come from? Why are we talking about net zero? And I think, it was only 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I was in the White House with Obama. We were trying to get 80% reductions by 2050. Why? Because we are trying to manage to a world where 2 degrees C or thereabouts of average global climate temperature change was acceptable. It was ambitious, it was audacious, but I think a couple of things happened. The public has now experienced with the fires in the West, the hurricanes in the Atlantic, the massive flooding in Africa, the 47 million acres on fire in Siberia. They're experiencing the way people, particularly people in Canada who live furthest north in the country, First Nations people experiencing the dramatic effects of climate. And we had the report from the IPCC, the 1.5 report, that talked about the delta between the tremendous ecological destruction at 2 degrees centigrade and 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, we're not really even on track for 2, but I think that brought the world together to say, we've got to be more ambitious. We got to do better. We've got to go to net zero, because that gives us a chance to stabilize the atmosphere and global average temperatures at that 1.5 degree level. And we now know from science that if we do get to net zero, the temperatures will stabilize much more rapidly than we thought. So that's why there's so much need, so much emphasis, so much activism. That's why young people are out in the streets. That's why we need to make good on the promises that that the Canadian government has made and the US government starting tomorrow at noon will make to the world, and particularly to the young people of the world.
Perfect. Before coming back to our US-Canada border and exchanges, Minister Wilkinson, do you want to react to the next COP26? I know we were very frustrated of what happened in the last one.
Yeah, if I can be so bold, I would like to suggest a few things where we would really like to see American leadership. Some of it is actually leadership that I think we can show on a regional basis. So for example, in the context of enhanced methane regulations, there's an opportunity to set a standard for the rest of the world working together. I think there are opportunities in the transportation sector where we can actually set standards that actually can be models for the rest of the world. But I also think that that there are a couple of initiatives on which Canada has been working where we certainly would be looking for US assistance. One is, we've been working a lot with the United Kingdom in the run-up to COP26 around the importance of bringing together the conversation around climate and nature. These are often thought of as independent issues. They are not. They are directly linked, and the future of humanity rests on our ability to actually address both of them. And I think engaging the United States in that conversation, I think it's very consistent with what the Biden folks have been saying, would be very helpful. The other is the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which Canada and the United Kingdom lead. If we are going to meet the net zero commitment, we must begin the rapid phase out of coal-fired power plants or unabated coal-fired power plants around the world. We certainly could use the United States in the context of the work that we are doing with respect to the Powering Past Coal Alliance. And then I guess the last thing, or the last quick thing I would say is, we certainly can use the enhanced ambition on the part of the Americans to help leverage the rest of the international community. And I think we will be looking for American leadership in particular to help us with some of the countries that perhaps have been a little bit more recalcitrant on the climate file, major countries including Brazil and Russia.
So yes, thank you very much for mentioning all the areas in which there could be cross-border collaboration. This is very important. Maybe we can mention also the barriers to that collaboration. But before that, Canada and United States have the longest undefended border in the world. But as we were mentioning, you know, ecosystem and animals don't respect political boundaries, and indigenous traditional territories cross national borders. So our two countries have a lot to talk about when it comes to cross-border nature conservation. As a candidate, President-elect Biden committed to expand protected areas to 30% of US land, water, and ocean by 2030. He also committed to promote nature-based solutions to climate change and conservation efforts led by indigenous peoples. These are also three core pillars of Canada's effort to stop species collapse and restore nature in Canada. Mr. Wilkinson, you mentioned some of the opportunities for cross-border nature conservation. Do you want to expand on that or on the barriers?
Well, sure. I mean, I think in the area of conservation and protection and addressing species at risk, again, there are some really important opportunities for us. I think it starts at the highest level in terms of models that we can usefully learn from each other on in terms of how best to do some things. But certainly at the specific levels, species like the caribou in the Anwar Reserve have been a very big challenge over the past little while. That is an iconic species on which Indigenous peoples depend for subsistence. That is an area where we hope we can make rapid progress to ensure appropriate protection. There are ecological corridor issues that we want to talk about, including Yellowstone to Yukon, where important migration of different species, certainly engagement of Indigenous peoples in important ways. And I also think that that there is perhaps, if I can be so bold, some things that perhaps the United States may want to look at Canada for in the context of some of the work that we have done with Indigenous peoples in the context of protection. The idea of Indigenous protected and conserved areas, the Indigenous Guardians programs, which we have begun to fund across different parts of the country. That is an enormously important part of Canada's drive to achieve 30% protected spaces by 2030. And I think it is a unique approach that perhaps is something that Canada can offer as the basis for some of the conversation.
Yes, exactly. So we have these new models of co-management and indigenous-led conservation, which are so important to a successful management of transboundary areas. So I would like to let you comment on that, John.
Yeah, well, there's just so many places for, I think, to forge partnership and cooperation. And I'm not an American who thinks America knows everything about everything. And I think we have plenty to learn from the Canadian experience, particularly in terms of Indigenous management. I have to say that the fact that the Department of Interior, which has enormous, it's the U.S. public lands are kind of split between the Department of Agriculture, which oversees the U.S. Forest Service, and the Department of Interior, which has the bulk of federal lands together, will be for the first time led by an Indigenous person.
Yes.
Congresswoman Haaland
yes.
Will be the first Native American to lead the Department of Interior, long overdue. She's been not only a champion of the rights of Indigenous people, but she has been a tremendous voice in the Congress. Just in one term, she was given the responsibility for oversight of our national parks, did a wonderful job there. She's been an advocate for further protection, including 30 by 30. I think she will be a terrific partner with Canadian colleagues. And the minister mentioned the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge, which I'm certain the administration has stated its displeasure with the fact that the government went forward with the leasing program there. I would note that there was virtually no bidding on that leasing program, but for the state of Alaska, which I think has a hope and a prayer that somebody will come back to it. I think the sloppiness in which the Trump administration carried out so many of its environmental destructive initiatives means that the fact that even those lease sales will be valid is questionable. And so I think we need consultation, because I know that, and I think the minister put his finger on it, there's important equities amongst Indigenous people in Canada, as well as Indigenous people in Alaska, about how that resource is managed and the importance of it. There are other places like the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness where there's an important opportunity, I think, for consultation. Again, the wrecking crew is still at work. So the changes they just made to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act need to be reversed. But important areas of consultation on conservation, as we've seen the massive loss in North America of birds over the last 50 years that have been well documented now just in the past year, are places where we can find common ground. And I think there'll be a real appetite to both in terms of common areas like protection of the Arctic, but also in the migratory corridors that the minister spoke to, where you'll find strong partnership in the now U.S. agencies, which will be led by people who care about nature. You know, we're pretty close to protecting 30% of our waters, thanks to the actions by President Obama in protecting those massive ocean protected areas in the Western Pacific. We need to do better, a little bit better, closer to the mainland. But there's so much work to be done to protect nature, to deal with the species crisis, and to do better land protection, and doing it in consultation so we get the best benefit with our Canadian colleagues will be, I think, an exciting place for government to government collaboration.
Thank you. So I think we can keep talking and talking. It's so interesting, and so many exciting things are happening at this time, but clock is ticking, and we are now at the audience questions. So I have some that arrived in the chat. I have one for Minister Wilkinson. We have many questions about Canada's commitment to fight for the Keystone XL pipeline, which the new president is expected to cancel. How does Canada reconcile that with our rhetoric on climate action, and how can Canada expect the US to take us seriously on climate change while we still promote fossil fuel? Minister Wilkinson, you're mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think that is an important question. And let me start by saying that, you know, Canadian energy opportunities with the United States are bigger than any one project. But certainly our position with respect to the KXL pipeline has been clear all the way along. But I do think that there are enormous opportunities for us to work together in some of the areas that I talked about and a whole range of others. I do think, though, that it's important, not just for Canada, but for the United States as well, to be thinking about how the continued use of fossil fuels in combustion fits in the context of a broader climate plan. And of course, we're going to be going through an energy transition over the coming decades as we move towards a net zero world in 2050. Within that transition, there will be time when we are continuing to use fossil fuels. And certainly, I mean, if you look at the transportation fleet in Canada, right now it's 98% using gasoline and diesel fuel. In the United States, I would hazard a guess that it's higher than that. We are not going to be moving to an all-electric fleet of vehicles in 2 years. And so during the period where we are moving through this transition, understanding that we do need to get to the point where we are net zero by 2050, Canada is of the view that it needs to extract value for the resources that it has and use some of the revenues that are generated through that to invest in accelerating the transition. There is no contradiction there, but it does mean that you have to be thoughtful about how you move through the transition.
Thank you. Mr. Podesta, here there is a question for you. While President-elect Biden has made impressive commitments on the environment, we know that key federal agencies have been gutted in terms of their environmental and scientific capacity. How long will this take to fix, and how long should we be braced for the damage of these purges to last?
Well, look, I think there's multiple problems embedded in that. There's the crushing of the morale. There's the loss of decapitation of the scientific enterprise. There's the, fortunately, rejected really on a bipartisan basis, the attempted real deep cuts in science programs. But I think one of the factors of the Georgia election, we talked a little bit about the effect on the investment program. It will also help in moving confirmations through the Senate much more rapidly. So at least at the leadership level, you'll have people back in power. I think that there will be, one of the early actions I anticipate will be an executive order on scientific integrity. I think that will help rebuild both morale and be attractive for people who want to come into the federal service. I think we'll have to think about new kinds of authorities to permit people mid-career to be able to come for a period of time. But there's no question that that there's been a very deep hit on the human capital of the federal government in these scientific programs. Again, I think that the selection of Eric Lander to be the president's science advisor, runs the Broad Institute, indicates that, you know, whether it's in human sciences and health sciences or in climate sciences, that the president is going to respect science. He's going to try to build back the federal workforce, but it's going to take a bit. And there's no question that we've lost a tremendous amount of talent as a result of the lack of respect for science and scientific integrity that we've seen in the last 4 years.
Thank you. There is a question here with respect to extreme weather events. We know that both in Canada and the States, every year we have a tremendous cost associated to extreme weather events. Here there is a question, Minister Wilkinson, do you see any possibilities for long-term collaborations between Canada and United States on managing climate-related disasters such as wildfires?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that that's another thing that has changed in the context of the consciousness of people in Canada, and I would hazard a guess in the United States as well, in the sense that people are cognizant of the fact that these kinds of events are becoming both more severe and more frequent, and the costs associated with cleaning up in the aftermath of these kinds of events is becoming higher and higher and higher. We in Canada certainly have been focusing on the issues around climate adaptation and trying to ensure that we're preparing for floods and extreme wet events, but also with respect to how do you manage forests in a way that it can be better prepared, and communities that are adjacent to forests can be better prepared with respect to some of the issues that we know we have seen and will see with respect to forest fires. I do think that there is certainly information sharing that can be done in a more effective way going forward with the Americans. I would hazard a guess that there's probably things that we can do in different geographic areas, including, for example, on the West Coast, where we had terrible forest issues this year that caused terrible air quality issues in Canada. To ensure that we are taking steps to try to ensure that we are collectively producing outcomes that will be better for people who live in both countries. So that is another area. We've talked a lot about climate mitigation and how we actually address emissions and generate clean growth. We also will want to have a much broader conversation around climate adaptation, both domestically and internationally, in terms of how do we meet the commitments we've made in Paris to help developing countries adapt too.
Yes. John, you want to add something?
Well, I fully agree with that. And I think that's another place where, and we're seeing this particularly at the subnational level in California, where co-management with Indigenous people is a place where we can both learn from what has gone on in Canada and apply that in the U.S. And the commitment, I think, to climate justice that and the creation and focus on climate justice, which will be with some new entities housed in the Council on Environmental Quality, will be places I think that we can collaborate on building resilience strategies and implementing nature-based solutions that both have the twin benefit of building more resilient systems while we're reducing and mitigating the effects of climate change. So a lot to work together on, I think, there.
Thank you so much. Time has flown. Unbelievable. I wish we could have talked also about economy and the opportunities that there is for development on economy and generating work and jobs of the future, but no time. So it will be a next time, hopefully. I will pass now the floor to Sarah to end this panel. Thank you. Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, Minister.
Thank you, Senator.
Great. Well, I'd just like to say on behalf of GreenPAC and everybody that joined us here today, we're really appreciative of the time for this conversation. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, John. John, in particular, our best wishes to you and the rest of our American neighbors tomorrow as Vice President-elect Harris and Vice President Biden are sworn in. I'd also like to thank our presenting sponsors, Bruce Power and EDF Renewables, and to our audience members for your excellent questions. I'm sure there was a long list of them, and as the Senator said, I wish we had time to get through them all. I'd like everybody to know that if you'd like to catch up on the recording of today's conversation, it will be available in both languages on GreenPAC's Facebook page and webpage. And lastly, I hope you'll stay engaged with us. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter to learn a little bit more about the great line of the events we have planned in the coming months, or maybe to get involved in our Everyday Advocates initiative. And with that, I'll say thank you and good evening to everybody, or good afternoon if you're on the West Coast.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.